Hello! What's going on, everybody? Although the World Cup groups have been announced and all that, there are still a decent amount of teams that are still yet to be determined to qualify. One of the brackets in the Euro playoffs is still to be determined, as there had to be a delay for that Scotland versus Ukraine matchup. So Wales, Scotland, and Ukraine are all still in contention to be in Group B, with England, Iran, and the USA. And then for Group D, with France, Denmark, and Tunisia, the playoff holder Peru will have to face either Australia or the UAE, both playoff holders in each of their groups for the Asia World Cup Qualifiers. And then for Group E, with Spain, Germany, and Japan, you've got the playoff holder of CONCACAF, Costa Rica, having to take on New Zealand, the Oceania winner. Today, I'm going to be giving you all of my predictions on which of these teams I think will end up qualifying for the World Cup. Believe me, I'm well aware that anything can happen. I am very much looking forward to which of these teams will end up qualifying, as I think for each group, it's really going to change the complexion of which of these playoff teams qualify. As always, let me know your predictions in the comments below. In this video, I will be joined with a legend from this channel, Simon. He's been here since the beginning, ever since I was making FIFA videos. Special thanks to him for helping me with this video. But yeah, let's get into it. Starting off with that Group B playoff spot, the Euro teams, Scotland, Ukraine, or Wales. Obviously, Scotland and Ukraine still have to play each other before anyone has to face Wales. Wales will face the winner between those two. None of these teams have qualified for the World Cup in some time. Ukraine in 2006, Scotland in 1998, and Wales all the way back in 1958. I think it's going to be a fair game between any of these sides to make it all the way to the top. Obviously, we're not sure what the squad will be for Ukraine yet because they are going through a war right now. We aren't sure if some of those players playing domestically will end up being selected for the national team. Don't know the circumstances of all that, but a lot of the players in top clubs all across Europe, like Yaremchuk, Zinchenko, Malinovsky, should be appearing for the national team. Lots of talent there.
All these teams had pretty solid qualification campaigns, hence why they're in this position. And I think especially if you look at a team like Ukraine in the qualifiers, I mean, they were drawn in a pretty tough group. They had France. They were pretty good at not losing. I think they finished undefeated, but they had trouble closing out games against other opponents. They had a lot of draws in their group, so we'll see. I think that's been one of their weak points. They've been pretty solid in terms of not conceding a ton of goals. I mean, they drew France twice in the qualifiers, but they need to be able to finish off an opponent. And I think when it comes down to it, they're going to be playing in Scotland, so that's definitely going to be a huge factor. But you definitely can't discount the fact that the whole world's going to be cheering on Ukraine. I mean, I think all the neutrals, for the most part, will be cheering them on to try to make the tournament. Scotland, for some part, again, they have that home field advantage. Slightly easier group, I think, in qualification. So if I really had to rank it in terms of these three teams, I would probably put Scotland at the bottom of the most likely to qualify. Not by any large stretch. I mean, I think they're just as competitive. We saw how stubborn of a team they can be in the Euros. I think they kind of suffer from the same thing Ukraine suffers from, which is they don't really close teams out. And it might be a bit harder to gauge. I mean, they were playing some weaker opponents. I mean, they had the Faroe Islands and Moldova in their group, and I think Israel as well. So maybe not the most challenging group, or at least not one that gives them the most accurate picture of what they're capable of. So we saw what they could do in the Euros. They'll need some of their players to step up, like Che Adams probably up front would need to step up if he's selected, because he didn't do particularly well for them in the Euros. He wasn't really that goal front they wanted. But I think the most likely team to qualify from this group is Wales, notwithstanding they're obviously in the best position competition-wise. They have a bye. They're waiting for their opponent. They just got done with a really, really classic win over Austria. Gareth Bale was on fire, had that sick free kick. I mean, in my mind, they're the most likely to qualify, and they break their duck over, 60 years of not appearing at the World Cup. I think with this amount of talent they have, young and old, I think they go to the World Cup and they have a good showing.
I gotta agree with you. I also think Wales might be the favorites in this. You mentioned Scotland will be the home team against Ukraine, which should be a huge advantage, but whichever one of those teams ends up winning, which have to play Wales, Wales will be the home team for that matchup. And Wales have a terrific home record at Cardiff. I think it's going to be too difficult for these sides because, like you were talking about how Scotland and Ukraine cannot close down teams well, lots of draws, especially for Ukraine. I think Wales play that out to their advantage. Sometimes they get wrecked. We saw it in the Euros against Denmark 4-0, but they have proper attacking players. Gareth Bale doing whatever he can for the national team still. Yes, he doesn't necessarily have the best work ethic for club level, but internationally, he's going all out. he's going to want to go all out, especially to possibly qualify for his last international tournament.
And just go back to Scotland. I don't want to put them down either. They had a very good qualification campaign.
They were the only ones to beat Denmark that run, which you got to give them props for, but at the same time, that was the last match day of the World Cup qualifiers. So Denmark were playing a lot of their subs. So it's not the best outline to judge them off of that loss. That was their only loss for the entire World Cup qualifier campaign. But Scotland were the ones to do it still.
They had pretty good showings against Austria, I believe, as well, because they were in that group. In fact, Austria only made it to the other playoff spot, which they lost ultimately to Wales because of their performance in the Nations League. Yeah, they managed to close out a team like Austria. And again, Austria gave Wales trouble. I mean, it wasn't... It was a great match, but it was by no means an easy match for Wales to get through. So you had a team like Scotland that I think won and drew against Austria. I don't want to count them out, but if you really had to make me split hairs, I would still keep my order. I would say in order from most to least likely, I'd probably say Wales, Ukraine, Scotland.
So you have Ukraine beating Scotland in that first match?
I think they just edge it. I think it'll be a close match. If I had to give a score prediction, I would say 1-1 goes to penalties.
I would say the same thing, except going Scotland's way. I think Scotland will win that matchup head-to-head as of now. Yes, Ukraine obviously going through this crisis. Lots of neutrals will be cheering them on. The belief in the squad will be higher than ever. But I still see Scotland closing off this team just a bit. Penalties, similar how they did against Serbia in the Euro qualifiers. So I'm going to edge it for Scotland, but then when it comes to Scotland versus Wales, I'm saying Wales win that. Possibly a 2-1 scoreline in Cardiff.
I'm going to say if Wales are playing at home, I'm going to say they win it 3-1. I'm going to say it's a little more decisive for Wales. Maybe I'm banking a little too much on Wales, but I feel like they're inspired, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be the team. At least that's my gut feeling. Wales, too, only had one defeat in their qualification group, and it was I thought it was a pretty tough group they were in. But, they had some tough opponents. They had to play against the Czech Republic, Patrick Schick with all his great form, and their inspiring tournament run. They obviously had to deal with Belgium, who finished the group completely, pretty much unscathed. They had 2 draws, and one of those draws was against Belgium to secure their spot in the playoffs. So, I don't know. I think it's, we're making our predictions, but it's still just very close. Any one of the 3 deserves to be where they are. I don't think any of them have gotten, lucky in any type of way. They've all earned it, and it'll be exciting to see. But if I had to make the call, I just think that it's going to be Wales ultimately.
Now moving on to New Zealand versus Costa Rica. Unlike the Euro playoffs where there was a home team, all the matches we'll be talking about for the rest of the video will be played in Qatar. And there will only be 1 leg. There used to be 2 back in the day, but they decided to switch it. All will be played on neutral ground. It's definitely going to be an intense battle. I'm not too sure how New Zealand will do, though. I haven't seen enough of this side playing against other teams elsewhere in the world. Obviously, they're the kings of Oceania. They absolutely bossed those qualifiers, scoring 4 goals, I believe, against Solomon Islands on the last match for them to make it all the way here. This side looks like the strongest in Oceania to me, but how could they come up against the Costa Rica that initially were struggling in CONCACAF, but now back to their old ways, absolutely bossing it? They beat the USA at the very end. This side, if they end up qualifying, this will be their 3rd World Cup qualified in a row. And we all remember what happened in 2014. That miraculous run all the way to the quarterfinals.
They were equal on points with the United States. But like the United States, they let some opportunities slip, and that's why they're in this position in the playoffs. We saw them absolutely smash teams at home. They have a talented group of players. I mean, they have Keylor Navas between the sticks. He's just an absolute beast and has been for pretty much the last decade. Yeah, I don't know. As I see it, it's going to be played on neutral ground. We saw New Zealand actually already played in Qatar when they played the Solomon Islands. I think it's a little tougher for them. They're in this position where they play a lot of, frankly, much weaker opponents, to put it like, I don't want to sugarcoat it, but they are far weaker teams. I think their biggest opponent in Oceania right now is probably, Tahiti, who they had to play in the sort of the lead up to the game against the Solomon Isles. I don't know. I think it's really hard to gauge New Zealand. We know they have some decent players. I don't know. As I see it, I think Costa Rica is going to take this one pretty handedly. I think they just have lots of quality on the pitch. They're used to playing, tougher opponents. I know maybe Europeans watching will say, oh, it's just CONCACAF and fine. But I think when you compare the strength of teams in CONCACAF to the strength of teams in Oceania, I think there's really not much of a match. It's still a pretty big gulf in quality. So if I really had to predict that one, I'm going to say maybe I'm being harsh, but I'm going to say it's going to be a 3-0 win for Costa Rica. I think it's going to be a solid one for them.
I'd love to see possibly Chris Wood carry this New Zealand side in the attack. He's got 33 goals to his name in 65 international appearances.
It's going to be difficult for them to overcome Costa Rica. And Costa Rica haven't been bad. Again, in these qualifiers, they finished with 25 points. They finished with a winning record. They had 7 wins in the octagonal.
The USA never won in San Jose. That just shows how phenomenal their home ground is. So will be an interesting test to see how they're able to play in Qatar.
Also, credit to Costa Rica. They gave Canada their first loss of the qualifiers, and Canada was on fire. I mean, can't take it away. I think that was the biggest turnaround we saw. Biggest surprise, and honestly, a welcome surprise. I mean, I was rooting for the U.S. when they were playing against Canada, but I can't take it away from them. Canada deserved their spot at the top. I'd love to see some surprise from New Zealand, see some fight. I mean, they have an interesting team. I do think it's a little unfair. Oceania doesn't get more representation. I mean, they literally have to have a play-in just to have a representative from Oceania. That'll probably change in the future. They will probably have an automatic spot. They have had some pretty heroic showings. I think back in, it was 2010, but they've had a really heroic draw against Italy. I mean, New Zealand's a team that can bring surprises. So I hope we'll see them. I really hope we will. I just think it's a big ask. Costa Rica is a solid team. And while they will be away from home, I still think they're more than capable. I mean, they're going to have their options. And the up-and-coming defenders, too. I mean, they just have a pretty solid unit.
I mean, their defense has been around for some time. I believe most of them are in their 30s now, but the likes of Kendall Waston, Duarte and Oviedo playing for decent clubs in Europe. I agree with you. I think Costa Rica will win this one. I won't go too steep of a 3-0 scoreline. I'll say 2-0. This CONCACAF team is showing massive improvement. They're not going to lose to an Oceania team right now. I don't know if they'll get out of this tough group that they'll potentially be in, but I think they got it to qualify for the World Cup. Now looking at that final playoff spot, it will be across 2 matches. Like I said, first we got to see Australia versus the UAE, which will also be played in Qatar, and then Peru versus the winner of that matchup. Both of those teams in the Asia qualifiers were not too impressive. Australia really struggled at moments. In fact, in the last international break, they blew both of their matches, losing to Japan and Saudi Arabia. Yes, these are the 2 sides that qualified automatically and had great World Cup qualifier runs, but you'd expect more from a side like Australia. Yes, the playoff spot might have been designated for them, but they still had some questionable matchups, barely beating Vietnam at one point, for example, drawing to the likes of Oman. This isn't the strongest squad I've ever seen from Australia, but they still do have some key pointers. They should be doing better in my opinion, and with this questionable form, I am starting to doubt them. The UAE as well, same position as Australia, obviously, in their respected group, and they just won the battle at the end. Australia was just trying to clinch onto that 3rd place spot. The UAE basically won the battle at the end against the likes of Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon.
Yeah, and actually Australia had a bit of a scare too, because Oman finished only 1 point behind them.
So I don't know how I feel about both of those teams progressing against the likes of Peru, I gotta be honest. But if we're gonna look at that matchup in particular, Australia versus the United Arab Emirates, I think it's a flip of a coin. I really do. In the past, I might have said Australia, but also another pointer is I believe the United Arab Emirates did beat Australia 1-0 in 2018 in the AFC Asia Cup.
There are some interesting players. They have some guys on Frankfurt, Toulouse. But yeah, there's no one that really pops out of this squad. I mean, Matthew Ryan's been on the team, been playing at a high level for a while, playing for Sociedad now. Turning to the UAE, it's even harder to tell. I mean, I think almost all their players are in the domestic league. They have the top scorer in the Asian qualification group, Ali Mahmoud. I'm butchering this name horribly, but he scored 14 goals, which is very impressive. I think the UAE can squeak this one out. I don't think they're not going to have a home field advantage, but they're playing in the same region. The UAE squeaks by. I'm going to say it's a 2-1 for the UAE. Again, this could easily go the other way, but I'm gonna give it to the UAE.
I'm throwing a spoiler out there. Whoever wins this one, I don't see them passing Peru. I'm gonna say Australia can grab a win off of penalties, 1-1. This Australia side, as shaky as they are, I think they can just scrape through this. It's not gonna be an easy task though, and I won't be surprised if the UAE end up doing it themselves. I'm gonna have some hope for Australia for now, but they'll still go home disappointed when they gotta play Peru, because Peru really has impressed me recently. This side is now going to be facing their 2nd occurrence of being in these World Cup qualifier playoffs. They were in the same situation last time, and they pulled through at the end, qualifying for Russia.
They also did pretty well. I mean, they went out in the group stage, if I'm not mistaken, but they played pretty well in Russia. I think Antoine Griezmann went out recently and said that he thought they were a very, very tough opponent. They're not an easy team to put away. I think pound for pound, I think the most difficult qualifiers, and people debating on this, but I think it's the most difficult, at least in terms of the quality of all the teams on average, I think is CONMEBOL. There really are no bad teams. Maybe Venezuela. Shit on my own home country for a second. But anyway, no, I mean, all the teams on any day, they really could beat one another. And they all have quality players that are playing European leagues and top European leagues.
Even with Guerrero not being on the national team anymore, the biggest scare for Peru, I think, was trying to find a replacement for him. But the other strikers are still pulling through. I mean, the fact that Peru was able to top the likes of Colombia and Chile in these World Cup qualifiers, you got to put some respect to this country.
They also got the sort of surprise inclusion of Gianluca Lapadula, Italo-Peruvian striker, and he's actually been a pretty good showing for them.
Cuevas also had a phenomenal season and is a standout player for Peru. Peru just has the quality and the results to show for that. They're the clear favorites in this matchup. Would love to see Australia pull through this, or even the UAE if it ends up being them, but I can't see it happening. I've said it before, so I don't think this is much of a surprise. I think Peru will walk out of this fairly easily. I'm going to say 3-1 for Peru.
I'm going to say 2-1. Not because they're going to be poor or anything. I just feel like maybe they'll miss chances.
And if that comes true, I see them being a serious threat to this group. They're already familiar with it from 2018, with the exception of Tunisia, obviously. But France and Denmark, they played them before. They'll easily put off a good fight just like they did then. I could see them being very determined to even probably make a continuum of the champion's curse, where France get knocked out in the group stage. It's possible. I'm not saying it's likely, but if Griezmann was already complaining about that side back then, and we've already seen France, you know, still pull through, but have some struggles along the way recently, like Switzerland in the Euros, it's definitely possible for Peru to pull the upset. All right, guys, those are our final thoughts. As always, let us know yours in the comments below. Some tricky choices, but I'm locking these in. Wales, Peru, and Costa Rica. Thank you all for making it to the end. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Like this video if you enjoyed. Thank you, Simon, for joining me for this video. I'll see you all very, very soon. Take care. La con noche.